Hello and welcome to a show from Ng Teng Fong, Sino Group Belt and Road Research Institute, Hong Kong. Today we will discuss an issue of anti-China, anti-Chinese project propaganda by the militant organization in the digital field. So we have invited a leading researcher and journalist working in South Asia and Central Asia on different separatist and militant outfits and their propaganda in the digital space. He has been known to me for quite a long time, but for those viewers who are watching him for the first time, he is the co-founder of the Khorasan Diary. He worked as a researcher with Hudson Institute, also with CTC and other such platforms of research. Hello and welcome, Ricardo Valle, an Italy-based journalist and our friend. Ricardo, I have watched your work, read your work, particularly on the anti-China propaganda by the different militant outfits in the digital space, including East Turkestan Islamic Movement, Al-Qaeda, and Islamic States. In your opinion, what is the basic content or the narrative in that propaganda? Is it a belief system or just a political, you have mentioned in one of your articles that Al-Qaeda in the past, they used to avoid anti-China narrative. But now they are also moving toward establishing an anti-China narrative in their file and ranks. So what is the driving force behind that narrative?
Yes, so anti-China narratives within the jihadist ecosystem, either it is a global or more local groups, has always been like a key factor, but not always as highlighted as other topics, such as anti-US or anti-Western or anti-local governments narratives. When it comes to China, two are the main issues, two are the main topics that jihadist groups usually exploit to advance their anti-China propaganda. The first topic regards the Uyghur population and the Xinjiang region. So in that case, this is the oldest topic that the jihadist organization has been exploiting, and this is also due to the fact of the presence of the East Turkestan Islamic Party and its history and how it interconnect in Afghanistan with other jihadist organizations, and subsequently how they worked also in Pakistan. So this is a key topic that has always been recurrent in anti-jihadist propaganda. And the second topic is actually something that developed more gradually and slowly, and it's more political rather than ideological in terms of religious ideology. And it refers to the perceived Chinese colonialism and economic exploitation of other countries, including Muslim populations. So in this perspective, which has been particularly developed among jihadist organizations such as Al-Qaeda between Afghanistan and Pakistan, but not always also in Africa. This second topic has been particularly crucial because it shifted the attention from religious ideology and an perceived oppressive approach to neo-colonialism, economic and thus political perspective, which is quite interesting considering the new narratives that are growing within the jihadist ecosystem. So these are the two main topics. And when it comes to Al-Qaeda and why today we see not only from Al-Qaeda but also from the Islamic State this resurgent in anti-China literature, it's important to highlight that this is a trend which is shared across several jihadist global organizations, both Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, and it is the result of an outbidding process between the two organizations. So you will have the Islamic State, which is trying to surpass Al-Qaeda in pushing forward some narratives to capitalize on this and also to draw recruits and disgruntled militants from Al-Qaeda or from local jihadist groups such as the East Turkish Islamic Party. We just saw an attack in Kabul some days ago. And when it comes to Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda has a long history of anti-Chinese narratives, but they are trying to frame them from a more political perspective or religious political rather than core jihadist and sectarian narratives. And this is due to avoid the fact that then some militants might then shift to the Islamic State because of these very narratives.
Ricardo, in fact, if you look at the history of China, it remains an anti-colonial, anti-imperial country. And besides, as far as the other countries or the Western countries are concerned, we can say that Al-Qaeda or Daesh or Afghan Taliban or whatever, they have a reason that, look, Israel is bombing Palestine, Americans has bombed Iraq, and that is the actually it is a kind of reaction toward their action. But in Chinese case, we haven't seen any aggression on the part of China on other nations. Why this propaganda? Do you believe that there is no, in the absence of counter propaganda or in the absence of counter narrative, that is why the militant organization or their leadership remained successful in spreading an anti-Chinese propaganda. What do you think?
Yes, so this is linked to the two topics that have been exploiting for the past years when it comes to China, the jihadist organizations. So you will have when it comes to, for instance, to colonialism and imperialism, as they accuse China, they refer to mainly two facts. The first fact is the fact that they go back to the history of the Turkestan region, claiming that Turkestan has been occupied to the same extent of Palestine, for instance, or to Afghanistan, by not only from China, but also from other regional powers, for instance, Russia. So they claim that Russia and China divided Turkestan the same way that Western countries divided among themselves the Middle East after the First World War. And this regards the first approach to colonialism, which is the more historical part and which has been running deeply within anti-Chinese narratives within both global and local jihadist groups. And then there is a second stream, which is the one I was referring before, which pertains to the perceived political colonialism of China. So they refer to economic support and aid and loans that the Chinese government provide to some countries, and they accuse China of developing the debt strategy. So in this way, they claim that, for instance, Muslim countries such as Pakistan or Bangladesh, they are the first one to suffer from this economic approach, and then they refer also to influences of Chinese workers and Chinese products that can flood the markets and then can also destabilize the Muslim societies as per their own interpretation of Chinese economic strategy. So you have these two streams. One is more historical and political, and the second one is more political and economic. And when you combine them, you have the core of jihadist, anti-jihadist narratives. Now, one particular more topic which has been exploited solely by the Islamic State is the Afghan Taliban and China relations. This is another extremely important point which developed from 2021 onwards and has been one of the most important topics when it comes to understanding Islamic State perspective against China, because they already had a long list of narratives against China, but this one became crucial because this way the Islamic State has been capable of delegitimize not only Afghan Taliban but also Al-Qaeda, being ideologically linked and in the eyes of the other jihadist groups. So this way the Islamic State is really framing continuously new narratives around this latest topic in order to draw recruits from other jihadist organizations. And this is something that has been developing for the past 4 years, but nonetheless has been producing a vast amount of propaganda.
Ricardo, one thing is I was thinking about that there are several attacks on the Chinese, and none of the organization has taken responsibility for those attacks, like in Tajikistan and even in Pakistan, in Bisham and other places. Some analysts believe that there is a case of a proxy, like anti-Chinese proxy, taking advantage of this war theater. What is your opinion on that?
So, attacks against the Chinese nationals, not only from jihadist organizations, as you were recalling, there have been attacks also from non-jihadist organizations, such as, for instance, the Baloch nationalist separatist groups. And so anti-Chinese attacks against against Chinese nationals and thus anti-Chinese narratives is something that is shared among different militant groups and by all jihadist militant groups. So this highlights that there is an overlap between all these militant organizations, and this also testifies to the fact that there is animosity, shared animosity against China and Chinese nationals. This can lay the foundation for either militant groups or individual cells or individuals who can autonomously decide to plan attack because of this animosity, and also because they know that they can capitalize on the popularity, on the effect that these attacks also can secure them among other jihadist groups or other militant organizations. And this also has the risk for states and for other countries to trying to leverage this animosity against China by covertly supporting or providing aid or support to these militant organizations against the Chinese interest. Now, these militants can do this willingly, so they know that they are receiving support, or either they can be infiltrated and without even knowing they have been indirectly supported by other countries. So this is more or less the scenario, and this is why it's very risky, and we are seeing these attacks against Chinese nationals popping up, and also without being claimed by different military organizations.
Well, tell me about the Central Asia, that there are reports that dozens, if not hundreds of fighters are coming back from Syria to different parts of Afghanistan, including Takhar. What do you think that this flow of the Middle East jihadist factors to Afghanistan coming back, do you think that this will pose a threat in the future to directly and indirectly towards the Chinese interest? And particularly tell me about the Tajikistan situation, because recently Chinese nationals were killed in Tajikistan. So how you see the future of that region too?
Yes, so this is a very wide topic and it's very difficult to address in just a few words. But if you want to summarize it very briefly, these jihadist organizations, and if we take the East Turkestan Islamic Party, for instance, for when it comes to China, they have a really long-term objective. And this is shared by all jihadist organizations. We saw in Afghanistan for the Afghan Taliban how long it took for them to actually achieve their ultimate goal, and they achieved it, so they can wait. So this is the same also for all these military organizations with local objectives, such as the occupation of such as the situation in Xinjiang province. So these militants from East Turkestan Islamic Party helped the Afghan Taliban first in Afghanistan in achieving their ultimate goal, and then in Syria they did the same. So it is true that to some extent some of these militants, their priority now is to settle down either in Syria or into Afghanistan, settle down with their family and become part of both the societies, because this is something that is also true, that sometimes jihadists can leave jihad and can just decide to settle down if it's possible for them. But there is also the risk that many of these militants, either for their ultimate goal or either because they have been fighting for such a long time that they only know how to fight, and they also acquired important skills, such as in urban warfare, for instance, in Syria. If they come back to Afghanistan or along the borders, or they manage to enter into Central Asian countries, they can definitely either directly provide support to local militant groups, either directly participate in militant attacks, or they can also decide to not to go to Afghanistan or to Central Asia, but they can also act as trainers, for instance, because many of these militants, they also, from Central Asia, they also set up some jihadist tactical groups. So they provide training for other militant organizations, and they don't have to move, across the borders. They can provide training also also remotely, or just for some brief amount of time, and thus they can also target interest of other countries, not just in China or in Afghanistan, but also in Africa, for instance, by providing support to these militant groups. So definitely there is this risk. And I think that what we are seeing in Afghanistan, and particularly with Tajikistan along the border, this is extremely concerning, because it testifies to the fact that that animosity against China can be partially weakened, can be pushed back, but it always remains something that is deeply running within jihadist groups. So thus, those militants who are still dreaming of the ultimate goal of when it comes to Xinjiang, which is something that is continuously repeated by the central leadership of the East Turkestan Islamic Party. That goal, if it will remain, there will be always some jihadists that are going to pursue that ultimate goal, even without leaving one organization or joining another. It remains something that will always pose a threat to regional countries.
Well, a final question. As far as you have seen it in Syria, that how Bashar al-Assad regime was fallen down, and then we suddenly saw Tahrir al-Sham. The reservations or the fears that very often the Tajik government is expressing, do you think with that chaotic Afghanistan like we saw in 90s, such kind of movement is expected inside Tajikistan with the support of Afghan Taliban or Jamaat Ansarullah or Daesh or whatever? Because the situation over there, it's also too fragile. And the current regime feel threatened, as it mentioned, that chaotic Afghanistan can directly impact on Tajikistan. How you foresee the future of Tajikistan in that matter, if there is a chaos in Afghanistan and the border remain irrelevant?
Yes, so the main problem for Tajikistan is the legitimacy of the current regime, of course, which by just being there, it fuels insurgency, it fuels those militant groups that have left Tajikistan, have joined the fight in Afghanistan or in Syria. They acquired knowledge and skills, and they can thus combine that political antagonism towards the regime in Tajikistan with their own skills, and those pose a direct threat to Tajikistan. When it comes to the situation in Afghanistan and its repercussion to Tajikistan, definitely a situation like that in the 90s in Afghanistan will affect not only Central Asian countries, but also Iran and Pakistan and potentially also China. So the situation right now in Afghanistan, the Afghan Taliban, their priority, we know that is to secure Afghanistan, to provide economic development and to rebuild the country. At the same time, there are several difficulties within Afghan Taliban and their past and their relations to jihadist organizations, which can lead to the incidents that we saw along the border with Tajikistan. So definitely we are in a situation where the Afghan Taliban are still attempting after 2021 to satisfy the basic needs of the of militant groups that are hosted and fought for the Afghan Taliban by providing their salaries, by settling them and making sure that they are not left unchecked. But the more the time passes and the more we are going forward and moving from 2021 and the moment that these militant groups were settled by Afghan Taliban, and the more these militant groups